BAM is a communications agency that believes stories move the world. We move stories forward for technology-driven brands that challenge, change, and create entire industries. Today, we're talking with Tyana Daley, Director of Marketing at Immertec. Tyana's broad experience spans content development, copywriting, graphic design, SEO, and developing content strategies. She's innovative, creative, detail-oriented, and passionate about anything new media. Let's dive in.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Dear BAMP, the podcast for PR marketing pros such as yourself. We got another week of nitty-gritty questions because there's no dearth of problems that arise in this wonderful space. And Tyana is going to help me out today on answering these hairy ones. Thanks for being here, Tyana.
I'm so happy to join. I love just the idea of BAMF, so I'm really excited to take part.
Excellent. Well, you are one, so this is why you're here, to help answer these questions. Let's hit it. First one here. Oh, dear BAMF, it came to our attention that an employee who has been with the company for a couple years plagiarized their dissertation in college, and the paper was published by a notable peer-to-peer journal. Recently, a media publication questioned the paper authenticity and after an investigation came to a definite conclusion that the report was a misrepresentation and plagiarism. What crisis comms plans, if any, do you activate in this situation? How do you approach your employee about the situation since media are now reacting and reaching out for comment? So we're starting with the great hard one first. What would you say?
This is so interesting. I actually worked at a company where one of the employees forged all of her educational credentials. So it was quite interesting because that essentially gave me the playbook of how to approach the employees. And so it kind of lends me to a few things here. I don't think that the company is responsible for speaking on behalf of what an employee did before being hired for the position. But to make sure that you can confidently stand that, I would internally ask leadership if the dissertation was considered when evaluating the employee before hire. Because if the hiring team didn't account for the dissertation as a credibility point or a proof point to hire this person, I'd say the company can confidently decline to comment.
Yes.
Because it's kind of something, in my opinion, should really be chalked up with the university, the student, and the publication, not so much the employer, unless, like I said, the dissertation was a proof point for that hire. Now, in terms of approaching the employee, I just be sure to collect all the sources that have called out this body of work and have it ready to share with the employee. If this person is a bit removed from their college days, I'd position it as the company's role in this situation as a helping hand, leverage us as media guidance, we're here for you kind of thing, versus being the shield in media for the employee. I'd let the employee guide that ask and address the media and use you as a thought partner more so than the actual voice that's helping them kind of rebuild or validate their reputation. I think if there was a crisis plan to develop, I'd work to make sure that the employee either agrees to not mention the employer. So maybe having a signed statement or just something internally that you can always say, hey, their opinions are completely on their behalf and it's not a representation of said company. Or if they decide that, they would like to reference you and you're comfortable with them referencing them, I would just make sure that you have the right messaging there, because they may use the company as maybe their accolades or progress at the company as a way to validate their credibility or their own reputation.
Yeah, that's what I would be concerned about.
Yeah. And that's so delicate to manage that it's you would have to work very hard with that employee. So I would say 95% of me is saying, don't comment. But in that very unique case that something could be made here, I would just work closely with the employee and make sure things are signed in paper and those agreements are clear, because you'd have to take that up to leadership and ultimately have them decide. I'd also be sure that if the employee decides, it's totally up to the employee. I mean, if they decide, if the reporter doesn't have ammo, they most likely won't write about it. So if there isn't anything there, I would almost leave it. But if the employee does decide they're ready to make a statement, I think a good rule of thumb is just to be accountable. I think it's important for that said employee to own up to the error and furthermore outline steps of how they plan to be more accountable moving forward and now how that relates or translates into their current role. Cancel culture is big.
Yeah.
And with smaller folks in a company, and especially something that ladders up like this, I think it's very important to not hide if that employee decides to speak. But it could also just be something that like quietly just goes under the rug in terms of the company's perspective, because I don't believe that this is anything that truly has to do with them. If that dissertation wasn't anything into considering for them for hire or considering them for that position.
Mm-hmm. I agree with what you're saying here. And you come from, as we know, some big companies, Disney, Lockheed Martin, Publix, like big companies that could have this really come up. And we don't know what the situation is in particularly this client, because people don't usually say who the client is or anything, as they should not. What I would further comment on too with this, it's delicate because if you want to be an ally with the employee here, in other words, you don't want to come up as defensive and go, oh, no, we had nothing to do with that. And yeah, that's our employee, but not us. It's like, that doesn't usually sit well.
Right.
So if you can have it employee-led, it would be amazing. Again, we don't know the situation here, but it would be amazing if the employee who, let's make an assumption, wants to be still employed at this company says, you know what, it may be in their blog post or a social media post or something just that's out there on the internet. Hey, this did happen. It is inexcusable. I am sorry about what I did. It has no reflection of my current employer, blah, blah, blah. And then have that be their statement, because my concern with this would be anything from the company that seems defensive and is like, oh no, not our problem, not our problem. The person still works here, but not our problem. It's because it's like, that person's in your house.
Right.
That's a person on your team. And assuming that alignment is still going to happen, that's going to put a divide between employer and employee. Assuming you want to make it still all within the realm and you want to back the person. The most beautiful thing that it could perhaps come out of this, again, we don't know the full context, is employee makes that public statement. Employer says, yep, we acknowledge this person's still on the team. Moving forward, we're going to do X and Y so this doesn't happen again. Something like that. That might seem like pie in the sky dreaming, but possibly could happen. And then to your point, Tyana, yeah, you have stuff in your handbook, your employee state handbooks, that mitigates for this. Any false statements or assertions that indeed do not happen to be the case could be the basis of termination, for example, or the basis of rescinding an offer, or whatever you want to say. Like, that's like some basic HR stuff. Hopefully this person writing in didn't use this as a pitch or something, trying to get media coverage. We don't know. There we go. I think we're moving on to the next question. Next one, totally different. Here we go. Dear Banff, my client paid to partner with a notable organization in their industry and felt this was the biggest news and honor the company could achieve. When promoting the partnership on their own channels, they used an edited photo of a major national celebrity that has connections to the organization to have it appear as though this person endorsed their product. It feels morally wrong and has potentially harmful repercussions. How would you level set with the client on the media response to a paid partnership? And then how can I let them know that the photo is misleading without coming off as negative during the, quote, most exciting moment?
Yeah, this is interesting. Some folks, they just kind of like are so far removed from if that person is actually okay with this. Sometimes people think celebrities just kind of have this brand that can be leveraged by anyone. But at the end of the day, there's still people who should be able to consent where their picture goes.
And they're an asset, so it's legally protected. That's the other thing.
Right. So you can run into your own issues there, again, with like using false information. But I think the biggest part here is really educating the client, because this is something that looks like it could potentially unfurl to be a bigger problem if they don't really understand what they're doing. So when it comes to cases like this, I always fall back on a solid either distribution or promotion plan. And by what I mean by this is like outlining the attended channels and media outlets that I would potentially want to amplify this partnership on to determine like a ballpark of effectiveness and reach that this approach will garner. Mm-hmm. And I think as a result, what you can do is like shield your very personal and just opinion of the photo and this whole process by mentioning that the outlets you're sharing to will most likely see through this Photoshop or kind of go back to their social media channels and see that it's fake. And knowing that, you can almost come to them like you're looking ahead to protect their brand reputation in the long run, and that the best way to kind of move forward on this is, hey, let's like maybe take that picture down and let's rethink how we can maybe get a celebrity or an endorsement in place like that, knowing that that is what is really awesome for your company. Mm-hmm. And kind of just play on like, hey, I see your long-term press narrative and that's what I'm really invested in, so that in turn you can get them really excited about the future and also kind of self-correcting at this early point. Now, for the paid partnership, regardless if it's paid or not, I think there is always a story to tell.
Yeah.
So I would look to spend the partnership less on the money spent to acquire, but on the benefits or the plan moving forward to work with this partner and leverage their influence and reputation to elevate your mission, your focus, your value prop of the company. So even if it seems like, oh, it's so hard to really write about this, where's like the core story? And some of the things that I think of is maybe brainstorm a chance to interview a leader at that organization, which kind of goes beyond maybe a celebrity endorsed picture that's photoshopped. Or maybe there's a chance to find another celebrity or influencer and kind of pull these two things apart. And this is where the plan really comes back into place, because you can more lean on the science when you know art really is like taking place here. With the science, you're like, okay, like strategically, we should do this because it'll add this number or it'll move this bottom line in some way. And in that same way, you can almost pull out the celebrity endorsement piece and say, okay, if that's really important to you, let's work on getting a real celebrity endorsement so that it could give you the momentum you're looking for, and almost position it as a concerted effort so that they can start to see, okay, I can get, a 2-for-1. If I focus on this for what it is, and then I focus on maybe celebrity endorsement for what it is, I can then have more play field and your client can feel more empowered as if they didn't do something bad, but almost like, let's turn this to make this the best situation for you. Mm-hmm. Knowing that internally that they're not the best elements you're working with. Mm-hmm. So in that place, I think a plan and communicating what that roadmap looks like really helps when you're having a conversation that's like, hey, this is not great, but I have a solution on how to make it better. I think that's always a great way to approach errors like this when people are very sensitive about something they care about.
Yeah. The thing with this one, man, you got two potential landmines. One is the relationship with the partner, the paid partner.
Yeah.
And then two, next landmine is potentially the impact with using the celebrity in a way that's not authentic and maybe isn't paid for. Mm-hmm. That really has to be navigated. So to everything you're saying, Tyana, and I like the forward moving approach of, okay, for our next engagement, for our next partnership, or even to maintain this partnership, here's what we're going to need to do. Let's not overstep. And I'm inferring here from the question, but it seems like there was just overstepping with then going through the partner to then use this celebrity. And what isn't told in this question is, did the partner even know about this? How did they even feel about this? That might jeopardize now them. So you're not being a good partner here. Forget that it's paid and you gave the exchange of funds happened.
Right.
They might terminate your partnership because they're like, whoa, way out of bounds here, using that. So there's just so many landmines to this. And to correct for it, you got to ratchet back and hopefully put the path forward of, okay, moving forward next time, here's what we're going to do. Here are the channels.
Yeah, I find especially with my work with early stage startups, it's so easy to pull something like this together and think that it's okay for now. But it's just like one of those things, like, and we see it a lot now. It's like, even though earlier in the career, you might say something and nobody's paying attention to you. Once you get big, there are some people out there that love to dig. And it's really important to set a very strong precedence coming out the gate that you're going to do things the right way. And I would almost challenge the company like, hey, if this happened internally without your knowing, or maybe it just kind of came together very like just haphazardly, almost challenge the company like, hey, one of your values is to be either honest or have integrity. Are we really doing that here? And almost challenge their own brand values against them as a way to help solidify why this is wrong and this could potentially hurt them down the line. It's like, let's stay true to the brand and our brand strategy. And I think that that's even at least a solid point that you can lean on if it's, again, is starting to kind of dwell into that emotional territory where they're like, no, but it's okay. It's okay. It's like, okay, no, let's go back to the framework in which we've established to make these decisions,
Yes. Okay. Oh, now we got a DE&I thing here. Dear Banff, my client is launching a diversity and inclusion program. There should be equity in there too. We'll just call it a DE&I program. My question, If how, should we publicize this? We know that many companies are doing the same right now, and the client really isn't trying to pat themselves on the back. We feel it's important to get the word out to show we're taking steps to evolve as a company. How do we get this right? Oh, this is like every single conversation happening online, I'd say. What do you think, Tyana?
Yeah.
Especially from the comms perspective here.
Yeah, I think it's a time to not be silent for sure.
Mm-hmm.
My very first question is there a Black, Indigenous, or person of color in your team or in the diversity and inclusion program that could take the lead on this messaging?
Mm-hmm.
Or if you don't, is there a local organization that you can partner with, maybe as an advisor, who can, again, essentially validate that you are doing this correctly and it isn't coming one-sided? And not that that has to be publicized, but I think leveraging voices of those who you're supporting can go far here. Because again, I think it's poor taste to have, an all-white, investment team say, hey, this is what we're doing, when there is clearly not even the initial step of getting somebody who is a person of color into the conversation or someone who's Black or Indigenous to have in that room.
Mm-hmm.
It's very hard to see that that's genuine when even the starting team assembled isn't diverse. I do believe that brands have to delicately manage how they share their own D&I programs, but I don't think that it's to say they shouldn't say anything at all. With that in mind, I think like a manifesto of sorts would be a good start.
Mm-hmm.
More like, we understand the problem, we're working towards the solution, and we plan to share our progress as we grow together to change our organization. This can live on something like your blog or your media account. And I think publishing it in a visible place is important. I've seen some brands create a banner or even a CTA on their homepage that takes them to this said manifesto.
Mm-hmm.
And I've even seen subtle social media to help draw back to that statement. And most of the time, that social media is really focused on delivering value. So for example, let's say you publish your statement online and you do promo on social media. Maybe you start with sharing resources or articles about D&I that has inspired you to drive change.
Mm-hmm.
And how you're making this effort in your organization, linking back to that static piece. I think making a statement, regardless if you have a solid action points in place or even before data, is important in helping keep you accountable as you grow, because press and your local news and your local tech community and even broader, your partners are all looking at you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sometimes hard. It's like, imagine if we're trying to be better. It's so hard to say that on day one, we know exactly how to do that. It's definitely a learning process. And I wouldn't, as an organization, you wouldn't even want to pigeonhole yourself too much with the specificities of your doing, because you're really exploring this territory. It's probably the first time your organization has thought about really putting attention to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So with that in mind, it's like, would you overpromise, if it's not yet tried and true? But I don't think it's enough to say that you're working on something. You also need to prove it. So I think by generally taking a stance in this manifesto of how you plan to move forward and how you plan to keep creating inclusive practices across all your operations and not just a specific program is really important. My biggest thing is I think companies have to make it very clear that they aren't making another table for Black, Indigenous people of color, that they're making deliberate space for them at the table.
Mm-hmm.
In doing so, I think it's really important, not only naming the manifesto, but in the background, start working on that D&I program, beef it up, make sure that you have metrics you can report on. And in a few months, especially when the buzz dies down, because that's just how news is, right?
Yep.
You can then highlight your progress and back it up with data. So start with the manifesto, right? This is what we're going to commit to. We're going to commit to change. We're going to commit to creating new programs. We're going to commit to this. And then in a few months, once you've actually executed on that promise, here's the data behind it. Because what I think a lot of companies are going to run into is they're so quick to say, we did a diversity program. We created a fund for Black entrepreneurs. We did this. And it's like, okay, but that's not the problem.
Correct.
It's so easy to spin up a side effort and put this to the side. But how do you bring Black, Indigenous people of color into your leadership team, into your managing partners, into your founder, into your portfolio companies? How does that all come into play? Those are the changes that the community will want to see and will actually make impact. When you create a separate table and you don't invite them to the table, there's still not that inclusion. There's still not that equity.
Yeah.
Because again, if it was a predominantly white team that came up with the diversity and inclusion program, you've almost kind of failed.
Yeah.
So don't shoot yourself in the foot, but still make a commitment to go forward and make that public. And I think always on the team, if you're the comms person that put it out, you can constantly challenge leadership every month. Like, are we following up on this? And you can then you almost have a written piece that's live that you can continue to hold your organization against. Again, if this dies down or doesn't seem to pick up the steam it needs to. But again, not overcommitting to something that you haven't even proven yet is effective.
The follow-up point or the consistency of the reporting, I think, is so important here. And I know now on this day that we're recording this in July, a little bit of things have slowed down because now COVID's exploding again. Like the news cycle changes dramatically. And if you have, to your point, Tyana, of just, okay, the plan in place and we have a set cadence on what we report on and how we report on it, great. And that can move and actually have the impact and the action behind it. In this question, it's like the person's asking, important to get the word out, taking steps to evolve. How do we do this right? How should we publicize this? And I'm of the thought of, no, you need to do. You need to not just say, we're going to do these 19 things, but great, why don't you need to do and take some time in doing and reporting, not throwing things to the wind to say, we're checking the box, and then never come back to that conversation again.
Right.
Because that'll bite you in the butt.
I think that's the biggest challenge. A lot of companies will have to work on that. It's like making sure that what you're saying isn't just checking the box, because it's so easy to say, oh, we got a D&I program up, so that's it. But you know what I really want to know is like, how are you tracking that effectiveness? How do you know it will work? What partners are you leveraging outside of your own team that can really help you drive value and impact? Now, those might be the things you mentioned, and that doesn't have to do anything with the D&I program. That's almost like the groundwork that needs to be developed in order for you to create a successful D&I program. So I would almost challenge this respondent to kind of say, hey, are we even doing the basics first and what those look like? And that might help inform what you say publicly instead of tying it to, again, what seems like a specially crafted table. We don't need a kid's table. They need the table.
Oh, I love that. Oh, last one, Tyana, for today. Here's our next one. Dear Banff, there is an industry reporter that always seems to be one step ahead of my client's company news, consistently finding a, quote, insider scoop to scoop the news. The reporter is really good at what she does and never posts anything inaccurate, but it's getting frustrating to explain to the client again and again why we have to give outlet X the exclusive. Help. What can we do to better work with this reporter and also prevent these internal leaks? Have you seen this before?
Yeah, I actually deal with a reporter like this in my current market.
Oh, perfect. Tell us.
So they love to dig. And I mean, to the point where I feel like they ask other folks for questions and sometimes they get information, but like ultimately I will appreciate that she at least tries to fact check with us. But there has been a couple times where we've seen stories leaked and we have to go back and essentially the best way that we've mitigated this is like, you have to become besties with this reporter. Like, you know, I'm not too sure if this reporter is tied to a big publication and maybe that's why your client is just kind of like, well, what's the big deal? Like it's getting out there, but it's just still hard to work with passionate yet rogue reporters. I mean, it's great that they're not like falsely reporting, but working on building that personal relationship with that reporter, despite the inside source, would be the best bet here. What I would do is I'd almost position yourself, like open it, like, hey, can we get coffee? And really build that or virtual coffee because, you know, COVID, but almost position yourself as like the real go-to source for any questions. And a good way to enforce this is maybe twice a month, email updates to them. And even if it's like not really news or so-so news or just like, hey, we made a new hire, we made this, I just want to keep you updated. And what that does is not only keeps them in the loop, but you have an open conversation chain for them to then ask you any of those questions. And they don't feel like they have to like pitch you or find. It's like, if you are essentially opening this pipeline where they're like, oh, they just sent me an update, I might as well just respond back and ask about said thing.
Exactly.
Then again, you're creating that. So if they have any internal questions arise or new sources, you'll be that first person to think of. And essentially you'll get ahead of the curve, even if you could be like, hey, I have some news coming up or, you know, and again, be cognizant because whoever this inside source is probably also has that news. Mm-hmm. Like, hey, I'm willing to give you some info at this said date. And again, I think those twice a month or even once a month updates, kind of strategically crafting what that should be has been really effective for us. because then that reporter feels like, again, they're validated and then they feel that they can come to us with anything and ask us those inside questions because, again, we have a personal relationship. Mm-hmm. Now, in terms of the internal leaks, I really think it's important to reevaluate how news is shared internally in the company. So if you're publishing updates like in an internal newsletter, I would just be very explicit in outlining that this is confidential and for internal use only. And if it is that confidential, maybe just elect to hold it back until you're comfortable or have already established like where you're going to place it with press. Mm-hmm. That way, again, it just doesn't jeopardize you or anything in that regard. But again, I think it's so hard not knowing where this inside source came from.
I know. Yeah.
So then my next level is like almost have a come to Jesus with your leadership team and any other stakeholders who would be like abreast of news before you launch it. And just kind of like further reiterating the importance of keeping news quiet so you can get the biggest bang. You know, even if the reporter happens to be a friend or a personal contact, I think education works best here. And it's like, I'd spin it positively, like, hey, with your cooperation, I can help you build a stronger, more reputable brand because part of that is diversity and the coverage that we get across multiple publications. Mm-hmm. If you allow me to do my job the best, I will make you the best and kind of give that person, you know, because there's going to be that person in the room who's like, oh yeah, maybe I should stop talking and also kind of arm your leadership team with like, hey, if somebody does come to you and wants questions, just kick them to me. Here's my email and create a chain of command with your leadership team and really arm them with that opportunity. So again, if there is a personal relationship and this person is just like in the DMs of this leadership individual, they have a playbook. And maybe that doesn't exist now, which is why this is happening. But once that playbook is established, then I think that the next follow-up can be like, hey, okay, why can't we follow this? And if not, what can I do to make it better so that we can? And it essentially gives you a baseline to work off of, since right now it's kind of up in the air. We don't really know who's doing the leak, but making sure that you're educating your team on how to handle that.
Mm-hmm. I love this approach. Be friends with this media person as much as you can be. Make it positive with the team to say, hey, we got to make sure that we're not spreading this news too preemptively. Let's be all on the same page. Yeah, the thing that struck me on this, Tyana, is like internal leak. Like, what's happening there? Unless this reporter is sitting in your Slack channels, what's happening? And assuming this isn't a public company, they're finding stuff out that is getting fed to them in some way, in some shape or form. Thankfully, in this situation, it sounds like they're not spewing inaccuracies or using something that is legally obscure. You know, so the person does say in here on, they're really good at what they do. They don't post anything inaccurate. So I very much give the +1 to, yeah, try to set up this relationship so that this person then doesn't have to do so much digging if you're going to be forthcoming with the information.
Right.
And then shore up the house and figure out what the leaks are doing.
For sure. And I think there's an opportunity too. I'm all about like having an outward press plan that I share with my stakeholders, kind of like this is the calendar, so that even if that person sees like, oh, okay, well, I can't, like maybe you embargo the news to a certain time and that's something that internally you keep in mind. But that really is just a date for that person who maybe have the inside leak to feel comfortable. Because maybe that person is just like, no, I'm not gonna follow this chain of command. Like this is my sister that's writing in this publication, you know? So of course I'm gonna tell her. That's a very hard relationship to mitigate that you don't know. But if you give like a press plan that every stakeholder, every leader in the company is very aware of, and like these are the dates we're going to align, then it's going to be very clear if that's not followed and it can be chalked up back to the team. Even when I have like joint press releases with my partners, I always send out like, this is when I'm going to send my emails. This is when I'm going to do this. This is when I'll get back to you.
Transparent.
Exactly. What you find is sometimes CEOs, founders, they love to talk.
Yeah.
They're so passionate about their business. So sometimes if you give them a leash, essentially, not in a bad way, it could help guide them to feel more confident in that relationship.
So true. Tyana, we've solved everything for today.
Woo!
Quite an array. Thank you so much for being on. And I hope everything is going to be okay in Florida. I know you're down there.
Yes, we're staying well. We're wearing our masks, washing our hands. So, you know.
Good. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Dear BAMF, the advice podcast for PR and marketing pros like you. Our show is created by BAM, a PR and marketing agency headquartered in San Diego and New York City. The music you're enjoying today was composed by Tiffany Dizon, produced by Daniel Kessner, and played by San Diego Symphony's Art of Alon. Thank you to our podcast production team at Citizen Recording. If you have a tough PR and marketing question you'd like us to answer, please write to us at bamtheagency.com/Dear Banff. Don't forget the F. We'll be back next Monday with another episode of Dear Banff. Until then,